My name is Tony Warner. I'm the director of an organization called Black History Walks, which organizes walks, talks and films on the African history of London every single month all year long. The walks take place in 5 different areas: Trafalgar Square, Notting Hill, Elephant Castle, St Paul's Bank and also Docklands as well. They last about 2 hours on average, and we take people on a tour which shows them the African history that's in the streets, the buildings, the architecture, because there's lots of it there once you know what to look for. There's actually something like at least 3,500 years of African history which you can prove to people, show people in that 2 hour period. We also put on films at 2 different venues. One is the BFI South Bank in Waterloo, and one is the Phoenix Cinema up in North Finchley. And every month, once a month, at least once a month, we have a film from Africa, from the Caribbean, from North South America, that's not part of the mainstream regular cinema diet. So, you know, fantastic action films, historical dramas, documentaries every single month all year long. I think the reason we don't learn about this history as Africans growing up in Britain is because the powers that be don't want to tell that story, because it would empower black people, and also it would, I suppose, maybe embarrass or disempower some white people, in that the history is true, it's accurate, it's there, but if you were to tell that history, the fact that there were African civilizations in Africa long before you had, London even existed, that would for some people be a cause of embarrassment, shame and confusion. Also the fact is that in order to maintain this supremacy, it might be to your advantage to deny the humanity, deny the existence, deny the achievements of another group of people, even though that evidence is actually there. Then it's in your best interest to kind of cover it up. The ways in which this cover-up happens is that, for example, let's talk about World War II. World War II took place between 1939 and 1945, and we know for a fact there were hundreds of thousands of African people, Caribbean people, involved in World War II. We had black Spitfire pilots, we had thousands of black troops fighting against the Japanese in Burma and Malaya. We had massive amounts of oil, gold, diamonds being supplied to help Britain fight the war. All that stuff is true. I can prove it, quite easily, and yet that simple information is not part of the curriculum. It's not part of the mainstream documentaries or films. In fact, when's the last time you've ever seen a film where the black guy saved the day, won the war, got the girl, whatever? You don't see those kind of films being made, even though it actually happened in real life. So that's how it is erased, because the facts are there, but when it comes to documentaries being made, the films being made, these facts are left out, and this has been happening for at least 70 years. What prompted me to begin this knowledge of discovery was the fact that I was always interested in history anyhow, so I always read books and watched documentaries and kind of tried to find out more about, my background and my people's background, so to speak. But what kind of kicked me off into kind of doing this public education is that I was working as a mentor in Northland with a group of boys, and when we asked the boys about black history, they had no idea at all. In fact, they didn't know what the Windrush was. They asked me, when I mentioned Windrush to them, what was a Windrush? Like, they didn't know the Windrush was a ship that came in 1948 with a whole bunch of people from the Caribbean on it. They didn't know there were black people in World War II. They had no idea there were black Spitfire pilots, for example. And they had this idea that Africans, black people from Africa, were eating bushmeat and were kind of backwards, savage and primitive. And I thought, what? This is ridiculous. So I tried to hire a TV in the center to show them some history documentaries and to give them some sort of black history information, and I couldn't actually get a TV. It was the Marcus Garvey Centre up there in Tottenham. Couldn't get one in, so I figured, all right, forget that, I'll just go and hire a cinema. So I hired the Rio Cinema back in, 2001, 2002, and we showed a film. It was the Rosa Parks story starring Angela Bassett, and we invited 400 people to come and watch the film for free, and we had about, 200 people actually turned up. And they loved it. They thought it was great because they'd never seen that film before, and they were really inspired and impressed by the film and the history. And that's what started me off in doing this kind of public education of black history. The absence of history in young black people's minds leads to, I would say, low self-esteem. In fact, I know that's a fact because I worked in schools for a number of years, and for the kids who have no knowledge of history, they believe what they've been told by the mainstream, what the history is. So as far as a lot of kids are concerned, their history begins with slavery. That in their brains, the first time they entered the history curriculum is they were a slave, and then they were freed, and then Martin Luther King came along, and then everything was equal since that time. So because they don't know the facts about thousands of years of African history on display in London, the fact that you had the great ruins of Zimbabwe, which are still there now, designed by Africans, built by Africans, you know, in the 12th century or whatever it was, because they don't know that, and they just think that they were under the whip somewhere, it does affect their self-esteem. But once you give them a few facts about the history, then to my experience, their attitude changes completely. And the purpose of my work is to kind of correct the imbalances and to kind of fill in the gaps, because if I stick to World War II, because World War II is not only on the curriculum, both at primary school and secondary school, it's also part of the national narrative. So anytime you open a newspaper, there's always some reference to Spitfires, hurricanes, and how Britain stood against the world in World War II. And that history is always being taught and told. So I always find it odd that they leave out all that massive contribution. The fact that Trinidad supplied, you know, massive amounts of oil to fuel the war effort. The fact that, you know, they were using diamonds from the Congo to help them kind of pay for certain raw materials. The fact that, you know, there was rubber coming from Uganda to help them put tires on ships. All those basic facts, which I can mention in 3 minutes or 2 minutes straight, all that's just left out of the curriculum, left out of the history. So because of that, or rather, I try to fill in those gaps and just give people back the history that they should do in the first place. I'd like to see reforms to public education, and that links into what I call Black British civil rights, in that when you check the history, you can see there's been people arguing for reforms to the curriculum, to education, going back to the 1940s at least. We've had Saturday school since the 1950s at least, and there's always been this kind of pressure from the community to actually change the curriculum, to make it more inclusive, to make it more accurate, to make it more true actually, and make it more factual. And there's always this resistance. So even now, like I said, World War II is on the curriculum, but the things I mentioned before about there being black Spitfire pilots and, you know, money from the Caribbean being sent to buy planes here, there's, you know, a whole bunch of literal ships named after these African countries. You can actually see pictures of aircraft with names like Mauritius or Bombay on them, because those countries or those areas actually sent money to buy on pay for aircraft, and therefore they had their names blazoned on the side of those equipments, on that aircraft rather. So there's loads of evidence there. It's just a question of getting into the curriculum and people recognizing this stuff. I think one of the common myths about Empire Wonders is that that's the first time ever in June 1948 that black people came to this country, which is a myth. It's not true at all, but it just gets repeated over again to the extent that people think that that's the only time black people were here. And the fact is, we can go back to 2,000 years ago and look at when the Romans came here, because there were African people in the Roman Empire, and African people came along here with the Roman Empire. We know there was a African Roman emperor called Septimus Severus. We know he was born in Libya, which is in Africa. He came here, actually ruled the whole empire from this country. He actually used to live in York. We also know that troops from what is referred to as Ethiopia or Africa came here as well, and we know that because they left graffiti on Hadrian's Wall saying, "This place is cold and miserable, want to go back home to Africa." So there's graffiti saying that, but also there was a body discovered in 1901, I think it was, a woman, and the body's called the Ivory Bangle Lady. So she's called the Ivory Bangle Lady because when they discovered her, she was buried with all these kind of expensive jewelry, including an ivory bangle. And when they did the DNA forensic analysis on her bone structure and the teeth, whatever, they worked out she came from North Africa. So we know that going back 2,000 years, we can prove there's been a whole bunch of African people living here. In fact, the Museum of London just recently did another bit of skeletal analysis and found out that in London there's a number of skeletons that have African DNA in them, or African kind of foodstuffs in their bones. So there's a whole bunch of evidence of that. So again, it took me 2 minutes to explain that, and I can tell you for a fact that most people, if they heard it on the street, would be like, wow, I'm amazed, I can't believe it. But it's true, it's just a fact that people have not been told, that's not been reinforced over and over again. But whereas you are always told Windrush 1948. Actually, before I get to the 19th century, let me go back to the 1500s, right? Because I can easily prove there's a guy here called John Blanc. John Blanc was an African man. You can see an illustration of him. There's something called the Westminster Tournament Scroll, produced in 1511, and you can clearly see an African man playing a trumpet on a horse. This is in the period before the British get heavily involved in slavery, and at this time there's a black presence not just in England but across Europe. So we can find black people at some of the highest levels of society in Switzerland, in Italy, in Spain, and in England, because this guy John Blanc, he was a paid trumpeter who worked for 2 different kings. He worked for King Henry VII, he worked for King Henry VIII. So he was actually part of the royal entourage at I suppose, out some of the highest levels of society. You can look at him. Then if you go to Germany, Saint Maurice, going back 2,000 years, and the images of him from the 1560s is far removed from the idea that black people arrived in England or Europe in the 1948, because you can see this stuff for yourself, because there's a whole bunch of African images in European art in the even 1600s, which show them as being noble, sophisticated, royal, good-looking, smart, cool, smooth. I mean, which is the contrast to how you normally experience in the black image at that time, or in the 1800s, because you normally see black people in the past shown as slaves, half naked, on their knees, blah, 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 blah. That's the normal experience. But when you see these images, it obviously shows you that there was a different treatment, perception, and reality for those African people who were living here 500, 400, 600 years ago. Another person I'd suggest to kind of check out, this is in the 1800s now, is a guy called Prince LMAO. Prince LMAO, he was brought here from Ethiopia in 1868, about 7 years old. So basically the British went to Ethiopia, mashed up this town called Magdala, and even though his mum was still alive, they said they were going to adopt him, or either bring him back to England for some reason, right? So he's brought back to England as a 7-year-old kid, and then Queen Victoria adopts him. He becomes part of the royal entourage again. And actually he has family back in Ethiopia. They're writing letters saying, please come home, please come home. He's actually saying to the British, I want to go home, I want to go home. They refuse to send him home. And eventually, after about 10 years or so, he actually dies of a broken heart. He dies of depression. And you can see images of him in the National Portrait Gallery. They show him in some European clothes, looking kind of quite smart. He's only a little boy, or young man actually. But you can see that even when in the pictures, you can see that he's got sadness behind his eyes, because the man wants to go back to his home, but he's been refused. And actually, you could even argue he was a political prisoner, because the man, the boy, wanted to go home. He had family back home. The British wouldn't let him go home. You think about 1948, right? And I can prove there's been black people here, not just even here, but actually part of the royal entourage, 1868. Another really interesting figure is a woman called Princess Sarah Boneta, Bonetta. And she was an African child who became part of Queen Victoria's entourage again. And you can see pictures of, if you Google it, she's actually part of the National Portrait Gallery's kind of exhibits, the images she has anyway. So you can see a picture of her, because her story is amazing, because she grew up as part, again, of the royal entourage, and then she gets married to a rich Nigerian guy. And they just look so cool, so wealthy, so aristocratic, so, just so well dressed and so impressive, right? And this is pictures from the 1860s or something like that. So it's like a photographic document of the black presence in England long before Windrush. And these people were, like I said, that Nigerian guy was a wealthy guy. They got married, went to live in Brighton, had a big kind of wedding down there, and that's the history. So it's all true, it's all factual. So the question then is, how come when they're doing Victorians at school, which they do, they don't mention her or him? Because the pictures are there. National Portrait Gallery, you can actually go and see it for yourself. Actually, you can see it online more often than in an actual display, but it's there. So these references are there. You've got a couple of names already. I'll give you one more. You can check out Princess Sophie Dulip Singh. Dulip is D-U-L-E-E-P and Singh is S-A-N-G. Now, because her story is amazing, because she's connected to an Indian prince who's the heir to the Koh-i-Noor diamond. The Koh-i-Noor diamond at the time was one of the biggest diamonds in the world, and that diamond happened to end up in the crown jewels, right? But Maharaja Dulip Singh got married to an Ethiopian woman called Bamba Mullah. So Bamba Mullah was from Ethiopia, or part Ethiopian, and she got married to this Indian king, or heir to a throne in India, in the Punjab actually, and they had a child, or had 6 children actually, and one of them was called Princess Sophie Dulip Singh, and she became a suffragette. So there's an African connection. If you put her name in, you can actually see a picture of her, because she was campaigning for equal rights for women back in the 1900s. So amazing story, especially when you look at her dad. And also it links into wealth, because that Koh-i-Noor diamond is priceless, and guess what? The Indian government actually asked for it back. The British government says, no, we can't give it back to you, for some odd reason. So some other really good sources of information are Onyeka's book called Blackamoors. Blackamoors is all about the African presence in England in the 1500s. And also he goes tough to Europe too, so it's not just about England, but like I said before, there's an African presence, 1500s, in Europe. And this is before you have the rise of the slave trade. So these people are ambassadors, teachers, musicians, students, businessmen. They're there. So that's one good reference I could think of. There's an exhibition at the Portrait Gallery called Black Chronicles, and that's put up by the Association of Black Photographers, I think ABP. That's their organization, and they've got these fantastic pictures of African and Caribbean people from the Victorian times. So you're going to see pictures of, you know, black people in top hats on horses, really well dressed, kind of very aristocratic looking people from the 1800s in this exhibition, which is at the NPG now, but it's from the autograph collection, and it's called Black Chronicles. Black Chronicles is the kind of term to look for. Black History Walk's website has a whole bunch of links. So if you go to the resources or the schools page, you'll find that there's like 50 or 70 different links to ancient African history, to Black British civil rights, to videos, to books, to websites. It's all listed there because we do this kind of stuff every month all year long. And we have a YouTube channel as well. And on the YouTube channel, you can see a lot of our lectures that were delivered at universities or different cinemas, and they're lectures that no one else has organized on topics that no one else has covered, so it's quite unique and quite, in fact, it's very interesting. What I see happening amongst our youth, if they get this knowledge, is that they'll be empowered and they'll improve upon what has gone before. And I mean, that's the ideal anyway. For people my age, there's a lot of people my age who still don't know their history, you know, are still a little bit lost, are still a little bit uninformed. And I think that when they do find this information out, then it just makes them better parents, better people, and definitely makes them a lot more confident. And also I find that they're able to challenge the system more. That's one thing I've definitely found in the last, 15 years or so since I started doing this stuff, is that when people come to my talks, lectures, films, whatever, they might come back 6 months or a year later and tell me, the information I learned at that session helped me in my work situation, helped me with a friend, and I was able to now, you know, debate or argue my point, or, you know, or get more forward than I would have done if I'd never been to that event. That comes up a lot, especially with people who have kids, and the kids might be either acting up at school, or they're not being treated equally fairly at school, or they're underperforming in general. They have actually used information to improve their life prospects. The sense of belonging is really important because, you know, my parents worked really hard. A lot of people's parents worked really hard for me to be here and have what I have. So I'm not just going to dash that away and just disappear. I'm going to maintain and build on that. So no one's going to chase me out of something that's my parents, grandparents helped to build in the first place. And I think the more people invest in their history, then the more secure they will be. Don't forget, every month we have a walk or a talk or a film somewhere in central London. It's happening every month all year long. So get involved, because, you know, things will not change unless people do something. It has to be based on action. You have to be doing something for things to change, otherwise it just carries on.